Coming up, although there's been a huge shift in the balance of power here in the UK, the power of the press and the wider media is still very much balanced in favour of conservative, reactionary and right-wing voices, but they're becoming more like angry wasps trying to escape from an upturned glass. There were some genuinely unhinged headlines leading up to the election, of which this one in the Daily Mail is fairly representative. Stay tuned as we unpick this headline and go on to look at just some of the unhinged right-wing headlines after Labour's landslide general election victory. Stay tuned. Constituency by constituency, reads the banner on the Daily Mail's front page on the day of the election. Your tactical voting guide to stop a Starmer supermajority. In fact, the Daily Mail shot themselves in both feet with this guide, which proved very useful during the run-up to the election for voters to see who to vote for to beat the Tory candidate in each constituency. Vote Farage, get them, they trumpeted. They expect their readers to be scared by their claims of soaring taxes after 14 years of Tory tax rises, which have seen the highest burden of taxation in more than 70 years. Uncontrolled immigration with Rwanda scrapped, they threaten. This after immigration has hit historically record levels under the Tories, whose gimmicky Rwanda policy didn't even begin to address the causes underlying the immigration figures. Already, the new Labour government have announced more practical plans to tackle the issue. Here's the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, sounding more like a grown-up than any previous Home Secretary during the last 14 years.
We're setting up a major new approach to law enforcement against the criminal gangs who are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk.
What else was on the Daily Mail's menu of terror? Rampant wokery. I'm sure that keeps us all up at night. Being woke, in other words, being aware of injustice and discrimination in our society, makes us the enemy, apparently. And me being vegan, rather fond of tofu, reading The Guardian and driving an electric car puts me in the first group up against the wall. Then there's the betrayal of women's rights, apparently. I assume that relates to Labour's open debate about gender identification and scaremongering that the rights of the trans community could possibly impact on the rights of women, and not so much to the very real Tory threat to remove the UK from the European Convention on Human Rights, a move which would have had real and profound implications for gender equality and the fundamental legal rights of women. Next, net zero mania. This from a newspaper that are man-made climate change deniers. Weaker defence. No evidence at all that this will be the case under a Labour government. And let's not forget that during austerity, the defence budget was cut by a massive 8% by David Cameron's government. Next on the menu, surrender of our Brexit freedoms. Plural. Asked to name but one Brexit freedom, your average Brexiteer can do nothing but splutter the word sovereignty and then fail to define how that impacts on their own life. Or perhaps new trade deals. New trade deals, by the way, which have fallen well short of the trade lost by exiting the European Union. Finally, the Mail menu of Labour terror mentions votes at 16 to their word rig future elections. This after the Tory government has introduced ID cards to suppress the vote of those without passports, driving licence or senior persons rail cards. The rigging of constituency boundaries to hand the Tories a few extra seats, and the increased limits on election spending to suit the size of the Tory party's coffers. The amount of doublethink that must go on in the head of a Daily Mail journalist gives me a migraine just thinking about it. Since the election, the Mail has run a series of front pages attacking the new Labour administration. There's this one, for example, from the Sunday Mail I particularly liked. They reveal Starmer plans talks with EU leaders. Oh no, 1 person in 3 won't like the sound of that. Brexit. Now the retreat begins, they promise. Or threaten, depending on your perspective, I suppose. This poisonous rag quotes Boris Johnson, remember him, as saying, "We're on the road to serfdom under Starmer," and quoting the embarrassingly ignorant Brexit negotiator David, now Lord Frost, complaining that Labour would take every chance to chip away at our national independence. The salty tears of these privately educated, privileged, dishonest white men, each drop a testament to their sorrow, anger and impotence. Wonderful to see. Sticking with the Mail, here is the lead article in the money section of the Mail Online on Monday. Wealthy individuals have been selling off investments in shares in recent weeks amid concerns that Labour will target capital gains tax to raise funding. Is that true? Well, no, there's absolutely no evidence of this at all. It appears to be fake news. In the Mail. Who'd have thought it? The stock market has seen fluctuations since the early general election was called, with some sectors experiencing increased volatility. That's famously always the case in circumstances that bring an element of uncertainty, particularly in the case of general elections. This time around, companies in sectors that might benefit from Labour policies, such as renewable energy, have seen positive movements. Conversely, sectors potentially facing higher taxes or regulation, like banking and public utilities, have faced downward pressure. But the idea that wealthy individuals have been selling off their investments in UK shares, that's just unhinged. In the lead up to the election, the Mail article adds, Chancellor Rachel Reeves said her party had no current plans to raise capital gains tax, but she would not rule out increasing the level during a Labour government's full term. As far as I know, Rachel Reeves also hasn't ruled out the introduction of VAR in political debates, launching a new £13 note, or mandating a return of CFAX. But I can't find the Mail articles about any of those failures of hers to rule something out. So let's move on to what, in my opinion, is an even more unhinged newspaper than the Mail, the Daily Telegraph. Their political commentator, Tom Harris, declared just 5 days after the election that Starmer has already made 3 fatal mistakes. Labour are already dead, apparently. And the Telegraph led their own money section last weekend with this bonkers headline: "We can't downsize and want to escape Labour, so we're moving 10,000 miles away. With Starmer in power, retirees fear a tax trap that will eat into their pensions." Well, 2 retirees anyway, that have been hunted down by the Telegraph. The article talks about stamp duty and capital gains tax, neither of which have Labour said anything about raising in the foreseeable future. But don't let that get in the way of a good headline. I can't believe I've got this far in this video without mentioning The Sun, who employ the misogynist and professional arsehole Jeremy Clarkson, who loves nothing better than the thought of literally throwing shit at black women. His online comment column this week was headlined, "If you're worried about Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, then you needn't be." A promising start, but a very misleading headline. Clarkson goes on to offer up such observations as, "I have a terrible feeling, though, that with Starmer it'll be worse than ever, because I fear that underneath his Playmobil hair, he's a card-carrying socialist who's supported by a vegan, Britain-hating BLT plus army with a rainbow flag that features 7 colours. Red, 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 red and red." He goes on a little later. He'll do nothing to try to stop the boats, and he will allow such rampant wokery in the workplace that every employer will up sticks and move to somewhere more sensible, like North Korea or Rockall. I think he might be trying to be funny, but on the other hand, perhaps he means it. I don't really care, and I suspect that neither does he. He's just a character actor, happy to take the Sun's money. But moving on, and no video about unhinged headlines in the UK can fail to include a contribution from the Daily Express. The moment they've been waiting for since the election. The first immigrants arriving in the UK after Labour axes Rwanda. The implication being that there is a connection between Labour scrapping the Conservative government's gimmicky Rwanda forced extradition policy and a small boat full of migrants arriving on these shores on Monday. The dishonesty of the Express in making this connection is evident when you consider that well over 13,000 other migrants had already arrived in small boats this year alone under the Tory government, despite the threat of being forced on a plane to Rwanda. Like all their sister right-wing tabloids, the mental gymnastics and doublethink that the Express performs must really make their heads hurt. And this article takes that doublethink one step further. In their warped minds, the Express and the other right-wing propaganda sheets are trying to convince themselves and their dwindling band of elderly readers that they're still relevant. Our challenge, they pompously declare, to Labour in shaping Britain's future. They go on to say it's their job to hold the Labour government to account. Quite who appointed them to that job they don't reveal, but at least they're taking themselves seriously, even if no one else is. The pomposity doesn't end there, as the Express sets out above the headline its manifesto, quite who they think elected them and what status they think a tabloid manifesto has, I can't even begin to imagine. But this so-called manifesto almost copies the Mail's trick of giving a handy list of Tory vulnerabilities. 14 years of Tory failure on economic growth, the NHS and social care, protecting our borders, Brexit, pensions, gender equality, retail decline, defence and environmental protection. If and when the Labour government do make progress on any of these issues, do you think for 1 minute the Express and its stablemates would give them an iota of credit? All I'd say is don't hold your breath.